So I was sick for a week. Actually, the whole family was sick, which is really fun. And just recovering, and actually just ran out of all my backlog videos, so now I need to record. That's why my voice sounds like this. Isn't it lovely? Yeah, and if there's a couple more edits than usual, that's because you don't want to hear me cough. But it's fine. I'm finally getting my faculties back and can actually think more clearly. So, while I was sick, I had the opportunity to watch a bunch of videos I wouldn't otherwise have been watching. And mainly it was some writing advice channels and some other stuff. And I've been wanting to do this video that I'm about to do for a while now, but now I feel better equipped to do it. Because this is the video where I want to say, first and foremost, if you don't write the way Stephen King or Brandon Sanderson or whoever writes, there's nothing wrong with you. In fact, you might be better than them. And really the meat and potatoes of this is just don't take writing advice from writers, me included. I'm trying to give you an overview, not anything specific, because that was the main crux of it. Was I was just watching a lot of videos about Brandon Sanderson and Stephen King's writing styles. Now, there is nothing wrong with how they write, sort of. It's how they write. That's fine. I would argue of all the writers and all the writing advice I've ever seen, they have the worst. They just have the absolute worst. And this goes back even as far as like early NaNoWriMo days when I was on the website, which I've since learned is defunct. And like that whole thing is over. Yeah. Silly people. But there was like things that they would send out in the NaNoWriMo emails about like they would get famous writers like Neil Gaiman or Holly Black or whoever to give their advice on how to just keep going and keep writing. And even as far back as then in the early 2000s, I kind of felt like their advice was very hollow and really said more about them as people than it did them as writers. And that's the main thing. And so like the first takeaway, by the way, because this is something that comes up with Stephen King and Brandon Sanderson a lot, is if you don't write every day, don't feel bad. I think their work suffers for it. And I'm going to start with Stephen King on this, because he obviously wrote a whole book about his process, and everyone likes to talk about it. And, you know, I saw way too many videos that were like, I wrote like Stephen King for a week, and this is what I learned. And actually there was one, I'm going to link it below. The title's a little misleading, but it really succinctly summed up his writing style in like 10 minutes, and frankly, that's all you need. You don't need to read his book on writing. You don't need to whatever. And it's this, is that Stephen King is someone who, he has all these made up words for what he does. And it's just, he goes into his office every day. He writes for an amount of time. And if he doesn't do that, he feels like he missed something. And there is a point where you're writing, especially if you're really getting into something, where that happens. Like I had that where I would get into the habit of writing, and if I didn't write every day, I feel like I didn't do something every day. But I have never felt like I was somehow not accomplished or didn't do something for the day, especially as like life events would get in the way and take priority. And I think that's one of the scariest things about Stephen King's method, is that he like writes on birthdays and holidays and whatever. And when you get that into your head, it makes it really hard to take a step back when you really need to. And I'm not just saying for like things that happen. Like I was just sick for a week. I didn't write for a week. I actually didn't finish my nano because of it. And yeah, I feel a little bad, but at the same time, I couldn't do it. And then there's other things that are coming up in my life that mean I'm not going to be able to write. And I'm allowing for those things. But the other part of it is some of my best writing is because I can't write. Some of the best stuff I've ever done is because I couldn't sit down and write that day, and I had to wait, and I had to sit on it, and I had to think about it. And then when I finally got to it, I felt like it was better than what it would have been. And that's a big complaint about Stephen King, to be honest, and one that doesn't get talked about enough, is he has a style where he calls it pantsters. It's supposed to be by the seat of your pants. It's a horrible word. I'm going to call it meanderer. That's a way better term for this. It's you sit down, you have an idea, you just start writing, and you see where the story takes you. I am all in favor for this style of writing. It's my preferred style of writing, with a caveat. I also plot as I go. So if I am not able to write, I will plot. And therefore, I like to follow the story, see where it takes me, and I can plot it out. And then when I go to write it, go, oh, well, that's not working. Let me keep going and see where this is taking me instead. But a lot of the problems I see with Stephen King's writing is that he just writes. And most of his books end up being more word vomity than actual books. I personally have had trouble finishing most of his books. Like, the only book I've read from start to finish, the entire thing, was Carrie, which notably is his first one and probably the best edited. But every time I try to do like The Shining or the Seventh Tower series, I can't. I don't know. I bounce right off of him. And I think it's because of this. I think it's because you can kind of see how he just goes with it. And there were other parts to this, like things like he talks about how, he edits as he goes, and is always like working on something and has to leave things unfinished, and there's value to that, and I've seen this before and whatever. He's not the only one who says this. Personally, if I have one piece of like personal writing advice that I would tell new authors if they care to listen, and again, don't take writing advice from writers, don't edit as you go. Write it all out, then edit it. Because one of the biggest failings I see with Stephen King, but especially with Brandon Sanderson, is if you edit as you go, you're not seeing the whole story in one go. And you start to just repeat, or worse yet, just start to meander a little too much in your story. And it just start to lose it. And so I don't see the value in that. And this also got to another thing Stephen King talks about, which is the kill your darlings effect of writing, which is the don't get so attached to a piece of writing or a character or whatever it is that you can't just say this isn't working and get rid of it. I find that only applies if you're editing as you go or you're a more immature writer. I firmly believe the more you've written, the older you get, the more you know how to not write those things. I've seen that for myself, where as I write, I start to go, yeah, this isn't going to work for the story. Let me get rid of it. I don't care right now, right? I'm just not attached to any one specific thing because the whole is more important than its parts. But the way Stephen King writes, that's why I think he ends up this way, is because he's writing in parts. And so, yeah, he gets attached to a part. Now, with Brandon Sanderson, it's first of all, his writing course is online. I don't know why anyone pays money to go to his classes. I'm sorry. It was just so much word salad, so much talking and saying nothing. And then I reread the Wired article that came out a couple years ago where people were like, how can you say that about Brandon Sanderson? And while I agree the article was unnecessarily cruel to his character, they hit on a couple things that I think people were just ignoring about it. Things like he doesn't really like to edit, and it kind of shows. And yeah, he of course he edits, of course he revises, of course he does those things, but he too just locks himself in his room and writes like crazy, and then passes it along, and that's how he's so prolific. But it's to his detriment, because one of my biggest complaints about Brandon Sanderson, even more so than Stephen King, is probably dude, you need a real editor. Like, the only series I've read of his is Mistborn, and I got to that ending and went, what the hell is this? I mean, he seeded it properly. I can't say he didn't, but like, okay, if you know the ending of Mistborn, you know what I'm talking about, but I won't spoil it. But the Mormon is very apparent. And so I just always got the sense of like, he's not someone who likes to do major reworks of his things. Like, obviously revises, obviously whatever, but it's not the same as doing like a whole second draft, which you sometimes have to do with your stories. Actually, it's one of the main things I would say you should do with your stories is write a first draft. It should be word vomit. It should be dumb. It should be every little thing you don't quite know what to do with and whatever. Throw it on the page and then throw it out and start over. That's why I like Nano. The only thing I like about Nano. But he's someone who, I think some things that were telling to me were things like he can't shut it off. And I think Stephen King kind of said something similar too. And this is very odd to me personally. Now, I understand that this is not everybody, and I'm not passing judgment on it, but I do think it adds to the problem of why they are constantly writing and not necessarily mindful of what they're writing. Because to me, I don't want to shut it off. I take every opportunity when I am out and about to think about things. So if I'm at a red light, I'll think about my story. If I'm in line and in the grocery store, I'll think about stories. As I'm falling asleep, I'll tell myself stories. It's what I love about being a writer, is that I can tell myself stories all the time, and I don't have to be bored in my own head. And I guess I just don't understand this concept of like, oh, I have so many ideas and they all come at me and I just need to put them down on paper. I don't need to put everything down on paper. In fact, I don't think that's a good thing. And I think that's adding to the problem. And I think the worst part about Stephen King and Brandon Sanderson is I think they could be very, very good writers. But in some ways, they're being exploited because they're prolific and they just keep writing and never stopping. And so for every book out there, it's like deep down, there are 5 really good books from these authors. But instead we have 100 that aren't as good. And of course the publishers love that. But what are you supposed to do with that? And some of these books start to get repetitive, the characters get repetitive, the scenarios, the insert plot, whatever. It just becomes like dull and uninteresting. And very telling for me was I tried to read Fairy Tale by Stephen King, the one he wrote during COVID. And I remember got halfway through the book, about the point where the character was going down into the fairy world. And I just went, I'm going to read the last chapter. And I did. And I went, yep, I don't need to read the second half of the book. Because where he ends up in the ending of that book is exactly where he was in the middle of that book before he descended into fairy. There was absolutely no rhyme or reason for the second half of the book to happen. Not even character arc, as far as I could tell. Like, there wasn't much. The character was kind of a little bit too altruistic already, so it's not interesting. It's just words on a page. It's just word vomit published. And some people like that a lot. I'm not knocking that. I mean, they're easy reads for the most part. But it's not the best writing, and it's not the best that they could be. And frankly, if you don't live up to that, you're probably better than them.